Hi, my name is Donna and welcome to my sewing journey. I got the loveliest email from a woman who said she just started sewing and she had a few questions about a pattern. And her questions made me think that maybe she's using a commercial pattern, so I thought I'd go over a couple little things that she asked me specifically. The first one, she asked me the pattern referred to seam allowances, and there was two different ones, and she actually said she looked it up, and everybody says the same thing. A seam allowance is, some of them are 1/2 inch, 5/8, 3/8. They all mentioned that, but they didn't mention what it meant. So I'm going to explain to you what it means. Seam allowance is the distance from the edge of your fabric to the seam that you're stitching. And that allowance is the leftover from where your material is held together. So I did a whole bunch of different ones here, and I started with, this is an 1/8 to 1/4 to 3/8 to 1/2 inch to 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch. The most common that you'll see are, especially with commercial patterns, are 3/8 and 5/8. And you'll see top stitching for 1/8. They would be the ones that are the most common, but that's what that means. It's how far away it is from the edge of the fabric that's going to be hidden within the garment, so that when you open it up, that's the part when it tells you to press your seams open. That little extra fabric on both sides is what you're going to press open. Okay, that's what she asked about. She also asked me about what stay stitching is. Stay stitching is usually, typically, they'll tell you to stitch a stay stitching around the neckline. It's for stretchy fabrics. So when you're stitching around, when you go from one side to the other, the fabric doesn't all shift. So what stay stitching does is it goes inside your seam allowance. So if you have a 5/8 inch seam, typically you'll sew the stay stitching at 3/8. And you typically start out the outside and work your way into the center of the fabric or the garment. And then when you go to stitch your regular seam, you don't have to start here, go part of the way, stop and go the other way. You can actually just stitch all the way around. What the stay stitching does is keep the fabric from shifting and getting all twisted in the feed dogs as it goes through. It does what it says. It keeps it stable, so it stays in place while you're sewing. I do that whenever I'm doing a neckline with knit fabrics, because it does actually make a difference, so you don't get that little twist. The third thing that she asked me about was basting and backstitching. I typically don't backstitch when I'm basting, and basting is basically, on average, most sewing machines, they have a setting that's for your stitch length. And most of them, the average stitch length is somewhere from, depending on the machine, 2.5 to 3. Some machines, the stitch lengths only go up to 5, so then you would use the middle range 2.5. Some of them go up to 6, and then you would use 3. You got to look at your owner's manual of your machine to figure out what the good average stitch length is. But for basting, you would go to the longest stitch length that you have, whether it's 5 or 6, and you baste it. And typically you do that for several different reasons. You might baste a seam in place before you do the final one, because the fabrics don't match perfectly, or you have gathered fabrics, or you have a pleated fabric, or like my little towel that I made, I pleated it. I did a basting stitch first just to kind of hold those pleats in place, so that when I sewed the actual seam in everything stayed where it was supposed to, and then I just pull out the basting. That's why I don't backstitch it, because typically if you're basting, it's something you're going to pull out later. So it just means lengthening that stitch so that you can pull it out later. It just makes it easier to get it out, and then you won't confuse that stitch with your actual seam. And backstitching, the reason that's kind of important, it seems like it might unravel, but what happens is you go over and then you go back a couple of stitches and then you go forward a couple of stitches. That little back tacking at the beginning and ending of any seam when you start it, or any project, is for any length of stitching. What happens is it keeps it from unraveling while you're putting it together, because you don't want to put your little project together and then all of a sudden have a seam open up. So you want to backstitch at the front at the end. But the reason you don't do it with the basting is because that's going to be eventually removed. So I hope that I answered all of your questions and helped anyone else who had questions about those things. And as always, if you have a question, please email me. I'm happy to answer them. I won't even mention your name. I'll keep you anonymous unless you say it's okay. And so please subscribe to my channel and follow me for more. I have another project coming up soon that helps with organization. Have a great day sewing.